Well, hello everyone. This is Mark Turi, and welcome to my Saturday Live. Saturday afternoon for some of you, Saturday evening for some of you, Saturday late evening for me, into the night. And I really do hope that we have a good stream today and a lot of good responses and impact after the fact. But of course, my name is Mark Turi, and welcome to my channel. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about a sort of a time in history that's a little bit near and dear to me because I wrote an essay about this a few years ago, and I'll get into that details, in the upcoming minutes. But I first want to say, as I normally do, please like this video if you haven't already, and please subscribe to my channel. I'm at 113 subscribers, thanks to being on with Marilyn Honig last Sunday, and you can go to my channel to see that video on origin stories, and we talked a lot about that. I was also on a few weeks before that with Brian Lucas from A Poet, talking about ancient history. And I'm really, really happy to be doing a lot of these videos now twice a week, normally on Wednesdays and also on Saturdays, which is noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. in the UK. So, as I mentioned for this week, we are going to go back and talk about a history topic. Last Tuesday, because I had an irregular schedule, we spoke, of course, about the four branches of philosophy. I had a lot of fun doing that. We had some really good response, and it was quite a nice topic, quite heady. But please, go back to my catalog, and we did a number of really interesting topics that I got very good responses from, including talking about revolutions and the difference between social and biological determinism, so philosophical issues, historical issues. I talked about the philosophy of history, and I've done other PowerPoints. Um, for example, last week I did a PowerPoint on the history of Yugoslavia, in which I showed a picture of myself when I was 6, when my family was there. So I always enjoy doing these topics. I'm going to keep doing them. This is a part one of two parts. So next week I will conclude the second part. But just wanted to sort of get that out of the way, and we'll get into a little bit more uh, more details in just a moment. I want to say hi to my buddy Clearwater Chad. I know that he was in New York City. Hope he got good time. Clearwater. New York City, I've only been once, and unfortunately, it was to go on a cruise. So all I really saw of New York was the shuttle bus ride from LaGuardia to the docks, which are in Hell's Kitchen, and then back. So I wasn't really able to stop off anywhere, but I do remember seeing Second Avenue between 55th and like 10th Street. There's a ton of traffic, and we went through the tunnel. And I just remember really liking Second Street. I wanted to hop off the bus and go get pizza wherever I could, but unfortunately, there was not allowed. But great, great city. Hope to get there again and eat some bagels and knishes and pizza and whatever else the city has to offer. I want to thank here Power Lines to Paralyze. I forgive me if you've been on before, but I think this is the first time that at least I've seen you. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you do enjoy the topic. I hope again you like and subscribe. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and it's always good seeing new people here. I do really appreciate your participation. Thank you very much for being here. And so before I get into my topic, today, I just want to go through some what I like to call house cleaning, which is just looking at some of the things that happened within the past couple days. around the world and in my area. So I just want to very much acknowledge Hurricane Milton, which blew through the northeastern part of Florida or northwestern part of Florida, Tampa area. Previous to that was, of course, Hurricane Helene. So the state of Florida had been, ravaged by, some high winds and storms and rains and hurricanes, and it caused a lot of flooding, and it was very, very bad. I saw a lot of footage coming out of Florida. I do know we have a friend named Shell, who lives in Florida, and her and I have communicated over the past few days. I've seen the destruction on her property, in Florida, especially, having, she was telling me that the power was out for a few days and no internet. And one of the things that I find really interesting about the US, maybe not in a good way, is that local governments and cities and stuff don't really help too much. You mostly have to hire like a private company to come and clean out stuff if you can afford it. But disaster relief, I know, can also be public. I know there is the FEMA, which is the federal government, comes in and helps as well. But I really wish the U.S. had more of those services through the city, through the state, through the municipality or county, etc., to actually do services where people don't have to pay, but a lot of people have to do their own, work. In my family, we have friends that have property in the Tampa area. They have trailer parks and small single homes, and they've been ravaged. And then I do have family in Central Florida, just north of Lake Placid, but we haven't heard from them yet. Hopefully, they're okay. So anyone out there from Florida, the Tampa area, Miami, wherever you're from, Orlando, Central Florida, Northern Florida, if you got hit, even if you didn't get hit, you probably know someone who did. So just best wishes and best thoughts to everyone affected by that horrible hurricane. It was a bad one. And again, I just wish a very speedy recovery. If you have, I hope you had the right insurance. So if you did get flooded, if something happened, that resolves quickly, and you can sort of rebuild your life, because I know it's a horrendous event. So everyone here, our thoughts are with you. And if anyone out there is from Florida or knows anyone from Florida, and you've been uh, hit by this tragedy, please let us know. And maybe there's some local organizations that we can donate to hurricane relief in Florida. If it's affected you in any way, let us know, and we can try to donate some money to some local disaster relief and so on. So our thoughts are with you. My thoughts are with you, again, because I have a family connection to Florida, and we have family of friends that live in Florida, our snowbirds from Canada. So again, just leave that information for us. Um, Other than that, here in Budapest, I think I mentioned on last Tuesday, again, our sort of irregular time, because I was busy on Wednesday evening, but on Tuesday, I mentioned that the last few days had been very unseasonably warm, and that went on to today. So today's temperature, and I'm just going to look it up here in Fahrenheit, because I always want to give my American friends the benefit of conversion here. But it was, again, quite warm. Um, so it was 16 degrees Celsius, which is around 61 degrees Fahrenheit today. And tomorrow, it's actually going to be a couple degrees more. So it's supposed to be 18 degrees Celsius, which is 65 degrees. And that is very, very warm for, the middle of October. It should be 10 degrees. It should be 5 to 10 degrees, maybe a low of close to 0 Celsius. So that means anywhere from our American friends in the 40s would be the low 40s to maybe high 50s or so forth, maybe low 60s, uh, as the absolute high of 60, let's say. So 40 to 60 would be the average, and even below 40, even mid 30s. But it's just bizarre. It's warm. It's yeah, but I can't complain necessarily. I went out. I went to the supermarket. It was comfortable. I wore a polo and khakis, which is what I normally wear outside, and it was nice. So hopefully the weather will start acting its age age appropriate and season appropriate soon. But so far, not too bad. Um, we're gonna start right now because it's been about 11 minutes around now. So I'm gonna start to get into an overview of my PowerPoint. So first of all, my PowerPoint today is called and entitled An Overview of the German Revolution and Civil War, 1918 to 19, and again, part one of two. Part two will take us, I believe, from about 1919 until 1924, roughly. And that'll be part two, which I will do next week on the 17th of October, same time, which is again is noon on the Pacific time zone in the US and Canada, 3 p.m. on the East Coast in US and Canada, and 8 p.m. in the UK. This PowerPoint is a summary of an essay, a 15-page essay that I did for a class or a course, which was an essay writing course a couple of years back during the summer. And that was in the summer of, I believe, 2019. I believe so, or 2018, 2019. And it was for credit. And I did it in proxy with another online university in Canada. And it was a writing course, is what it's called. There's reading courses and writing courses in history. I did do a reading course, but this one was a writing course, so culminated in a 15-page paper. And I decided to write about this time, which is very unknown or little known in in some parts of history circles. It's just really is highly dependent on where you're being taught history. So I find in North America, this era is not very well known, whereas in Germany and some parts of Europe, especially, it's a more well known event. And I sort of wanted to, you know, get into some of the details and nitty gritty there. So of course, my paper was my paper. I submitted it. I did pretty well, etc. But this was a PowerPoint that I did also a couple of years ago to another group in Toronto. It was also in September, I want to say 2020 or 2019 or 2020. I don't remember. Anyway, it did very well and got a good response. And so I'm going to continue it here. I want to say hello to my friend here, Irish Mart. Great to see you, Irish. I hope everything is well on your end. I hope it's been a great week. And yes, I'm just about to start my PowerPoint presentation. So we just talked a little bit about Florida and the hurricanes, and then also the weather here being very warm in Hungary. I hope it's been great weather in Ireland and so on. So just about to start. And I just went over just a little bit about why I was interested in doing this particular PowerPoint, which was based off an essay that I wrote for a class and also a PowerPoint that I gave to another group online a couple of years ago. So let's get started here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up to full screen and then I'm going to go back and forth to full screen. So if I don't immediately respond, because I like to sort of immediately respond sometimes um, to posts, especially if we have friends or something. Just hold on a little bit because I will get to that after a couple slides. Then I'll come back and do some break and then move and then go on. So let's start with this. And again, I'm going to go full screen now, which I am at the moment. So I also titled the stream a little bit differently from the PowerPoint, but an overview of the German Revolution and German Civil War. I used for the PowerPoint. I actually did use the title of my essay from back. I think again it was 2018 or 19, and it was called "Revolution and Counter-Revolution: Communism and Nationalism in Germany from 1918 to about 1923." And I think I'm gonna do that's just a basis, I think, because I have a little bit maybe different slides and stuff than last time, but sort of here we go. So the first thing is we're not going to start. This is not. I can give an introduction into World War One, but pretty much it's review. I know a lot of people know it. Assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the alliances that explode with Serbia and Russia on one end, and then Austria, Hungary, Germany on another end, and then Germany invades Belgium, and then that's why England gets involved, and then Italy's involved, and the Ottomans are involved, Romania's involved, and America gets involved, and then by 1918, the war itself is kind of wrapping up, especially by November. But even before that, okay, during World War One, there's two really interesting events. One obviously is probably more impactful to the world, and the second one a little bit more impactful to the war itself, although they both have consequences for the war and also the world. But in this case, there are two very interesting revolutions that happen during this World War One. So during the later phase of World War One, of course, we get the Russian Revolution. Now, there had been an attempt to make a revolution in February of 1917, which failed. But in October 1917, there was the October Revolution. And you can see in this photograph, in the foreground, the person who's the most large and the most in focus is Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. We talked about him a couple weeks ago when we talked about Marxism, Leninism, the Vanguard Party, and his kind of pragmatic view of communism, which was to get people of the Vanguard Party, the professional revolutionaries, into certain institutions to then stimulate the revolution from the bottom up and not wait for a revolution. So the revolution happens in Russia. Russia had, of course, previously invaded on behalf of the Serbs. They had gone to war with Germany and Austria Hungary. They had invaded today parts of Poland and Ukraine. They suffered a lot of casualties due to the size of their army. But the war was going unfavorably, and so was the image of the Tsar. And so eventually Lenin was able to shift the powers, which led to the Bolshevik Revolution. Again, this is what it depicts. And then there was a civil war in Russia, and by the early 1920s, Lenin had established the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So that's one big event that shifts the war. It gets Russia out of the war. And of course, Russia was on the side of Great Britain, France, Serbia. However, about a week before, so November 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9, 10, 11. That's about 8 days before the armistice is signed. There is a city in the northwest of Germany called Kiel. As you can see here, Kiel, Kiel. And it's located on the coast of the North Sea between what is today the Netherlands, so the northeast Netherlands, and of course the south western part of Denmark. Denmark is made up of a peninsula, half of a peninsula called Jutland, and a number of islands. So there's that Jutland Peninsula that sticks up out of Germany. And in between those places, there's this city. And Kiel was a station, a port for the German Navy during World War One. Around this time, just prior to this, in late October, early November of 1918, the German Navy was given an order, and we can see the blue orders and map here and the red arrow map here. So they were ordered to leave Kiel, and this was every ship that was at their disposal. Go to the north part of the Netherlands where there's a yellow circle, engage with the British and French Navy, and then one part of the Navy was supposed to go all the way up until I believe that is actually Scotland, and another part of the Navy was going to go to, I believe that's Kent and parts of Belgium, and they were essentially going to make a suicide mission, a suicide attack on these three different ports in order to try to cripple the French, well, mostly British, of course, but also maybe some French Navy. What led to this was called the Kiel Mutiny, which took place on the 3rd of November, 1918, when the sailors decided no, they were not going to do a suicide mission. They had had enough. They knew that the war was kind of coming to an end, while, of course, the armistice had not been signed yet, or had not been negotiated yet. Germany was losing on the Western Front, the Americans were pulling through. And during this time, the Austro-Hungarian army was losing quite big in northeastern Italy. And so the feeling of the war led to what's called the Kiel Mutiny. Now, what's interesting about this is that until the end of the war, so roughly about a week after, or during the week, the last week, let's say, of World War One, is the sailors themselves also started to revolt. And some of those revolts went to different cities in Germany. For example, there was a sailors' revolt in Frankfurt, and there was a sailors' revolt in Brunswick, which were two quite large cities in the empire where they just refused to go out on assignment. And so some of this internal strife that was happening in Germany, along with them losing ground on the Western Front, plus many other internal factors within Germany, political factors, economic factors, led to the armistice of 1918. We all kind of know this. It used to be called Armistice Day, where it's also, I think, referred to as, is it, please always forgive me if it's Veterans Day in the United States. I can't remember if it's Veterans or Memorial. I think it's Veterans Day. And in the Commonwealth, we usually call it Remembrance Day, but either Armistice Day or Remembrance Day in the Commonwealth, and then usually Veterans Day, I believe it is, right? Because I think Memorial Day is like in May, somewhere around there. And so this commemorates every year on the 11th of November when the Entente and the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente signed an armistice to end the war. So you can imagine that this was quite a good, quite a celebratory experience. And here's a photo of Berlin on Armistice Day. You can see the crowd of people who were extremely happy and jubilant to have the war to an end. And you can see on the left, on the upper left, this is the Brandenburger Gate. This is one of the most noticeable, buildings, landmarks in the city of Berlin. It's extremely famous for many reasons. Going to show it later for another reason. But certainly all over the world, New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, Toronto, Vancouver, London, Paris, Budapest, Sydney, Australia, Wellington, New Zealand. I mean, a lot of people had participated from a lot of countries in the First World War, Rome, etc. And especially the people in like Belgium and the Netherlands, and people in the Eastern Front of Poland and so forth, were very, very happy to see the war come to an end. What's interesting about the armistice is here's a couple of different points and terms of the armistice. So one is that the German troops had to withdraw from east of the Rhine River. So if you know about World War one of the reasons why the German army decided to invade Belgium is because around an area called the Alsace-Lorraine, there was heavy fortifications around this area called the Siegfried Line, and it was like a no man's land. It was filled with tank obstacles, bunkers, barbed wire, and so the idea of the Germans was that they would circumvent the Siegfried Line through Belgium, go into Paris, quickly knock out the French, and then go to the east to help Austria-Hungary take on the Russians. And of course, it didn't happen. In Belgium and France, in north or western France, there was a stalemate, of course, with the trenches, and then that lasted until the Americans really joined the war, and others, like the Canadians and the Brits, started finding different ways on how to go through those trenches, including in the Canadian front. We have a battle called Vimy Ridge, which is when all of the divisions, I think there were 3 or 4 Canadian divisions, actually fought together for the first time. And our Canadian strategy was to fire artillery as the troops advanced. So rather than firing artillery, waiting, then advancing, we were firing artillery, and it would, scare the Germans, and this led to some victories. Also, the French, um, I think, had to have been Australian, New Zealanders as well. A whole number of people started, to attempt this, and then the sheer magnitude of power of the pardon me, of the American army, which landed quite a few troops. So that was what it meant by east of the Rhine. It became a neutral zone and a demilitarized zone until 1933. The German Navy, as I mentioned earlier, had to surrender all of their submarines, as well as they were prevented from building new ships. The German U-boats had sunk a ship called the Lusitania, which probably was, the catalyst of bringing America into the war. And I believe it was a civilian vessel, so these German subs and U-boats were quite deadly, as they would also become in the Second World War. The German army was then ordered to destroy 6 million rifles, 15,000 airplanes, and destroy 130,000 machine guns. And then Germany was banned at the interim from having an air force. So, Veterans Day, yes, thank you so much, Veterans Day. Yeah, because I think Memorial Day is like in May. It's in the spring. Thanks, Power. So I'm just looking to see here. Okay, so these were the terms. Now, what's interesting about these terms is that a lot of people in Germany, why are they celebrating, right? Well, they're celebrating an armistice. An armistice means simply to end the conflict. It wouldn't really become apparent to the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians, as well as the Ottomans, until the preceding months, going into especially 1919, 1920, 1921, with what are referred to as the Treaties of Versailles, which include the Treaty of Saint Germain, which establishes Austria as a republic, the Treaty of Trianon, which breaks up the Kingdom of Hungary in order to establish Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Poland, and then the Treaty of Service, which breaks up the Ottoman Empire and establishes later the Republic of Turkey, and then the British mandates for Iraq and Palestine and Jordan, which includes today's Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, and then the French Syrian mandate, which also includes Lebanon. And also, of course, Italy, France, and England had a piece of what is today Turkey. They would completely withdraw. Greece had a piece of a city called Izmir, also known as Smyrna, that would then fall by 1923 when Turkey became a country. But it really became apparent that they had lost the war after the fact. What is a myth is that the Germans felt betrayed by this. That is something when I bring up in my next presentation when we talk about the exploitation of Hitler and the Nazi Party, especially in the 20s and in the 30s. This idea of feeling betrayed was something that came later. It was kind of a historical revisionism, but at least at the time, the Germans were quite surprised that they had lost the war and that they were being subject to this demilitarized zone and basically neutering their navy, their army, and not being able to have an air force. So this is a really interesting historical character. Some of you may know, some of you may not. Again, it's hard for me to decipher this. Certainly, I had only heard a little bit about Rosa Luxemburg until I actually started to learn more about her. But again, this is a young woman named Rosa Luxemburg who was born in today's Poland in 1871. The photo that I have here on the left is either from 1895 to 1905, somewhere in that decade, when she's either 24 to 34 years old. It hasn't been yet confirmed exactly when, but this is when she is a young woman in her 20s. And she moved to Germany as a young woman, and she became known for a couple of different things. The first is that she was a communist. She believed very much in communism and most likely became that over the period of her life. And the second one is her and a friend named Karl Liebknecht, who was a lawyer, founded what was called the Spartacus League, which was an off kind of schism of the German Communist Party. So in 1919, Rosa Luxemburg is living in Berlin, and she had seen the aftermath of that war, and she had also seen the 4 years of the horrors of that war and what it did to the people who were fighting and came back. So she wanted a revolution, and I would say that she's probably more in the realm of a Marxist Leninist, at least to some extent. And there is something, by the way, called Luxemburgism. It is actually a type of communism. So, as the Russian Revolution is happening, communists all over Europe and all over the world are taking notice. And they want to bring the revolution to where they live, in this case, to their backyard. And for Rosa Luxemburg, that was Berlin. So these quotes that I'm going to give you, and there are several of them, are on an archival website called Marxist.org. They are not a Marxist organization. They don't profess Marxism, but what they do is they take primary sources, diaries, writings, and speeches from Marxists and communists and revolutionaries, and they archive them into this actually really wonderful website, which is independent and independently sourced. So these are people who, if you have a document or a book, you can photocopy it or send it to these individuals and they will digitize it and put it on their website. So it's actually a very, very helpful for me when I was writing this essay that I did a few years back. So, what are the goals for Rosa in trying to bring a revolution, and especially looking at World War One? Was that preserving the honor of the Russian Revolution is identical with vindicating that of the German proletariat and of international socialists. As I mentioned, Russian Revolution was happening in October of 1917. It had gone through to 1918 while they were fighting against Mensheviks and then the White armies. And so she wants to bring this. She wants the ideas of the Russian Revolution to sort of penetrate and spread throughout Europe. And in that case, she's saying it will vindicate the German proletariat and international socialists who had been suffering on the front lines and also at home during the war. Here we say, she says, the masses of workers who for 4 years were exploited, crushed, and starved have revolted. And of course, she's talking about the soldiers that had returned from the front after the 4 years. Because when they came home to Germany, there was high rates of unemployment. There was no disability. There had been a lot of people who had been missing arms and legs and had a shell shock, which they used to call it. And there was simply nothing to do. And there were many homeless veterans that would beg on the street, people with severe problems physically, mentally, and emotionally. And as she says here, they were starved and exploited for 4 years. And then she gets to the goals of this revolution that she's thinking will happen to in Berlin. She says that the abolition of capitalism rule and the realization of a socialist order of society, this and nothing less is the historical theme of the present revolution. And again, please go back if you'd like to make some references on number one, my a presentation a few weeks back on the philosophy of history, where I talk about Marxism and I talk about things like chronology and, almost a fatalistic inevitability, purposeful type of history versus the others. And then what happened when the revolution didn't happen. We can look at that as well. So I have two videos that will expand if you're interested in that idea about this historical theme and so forth. So in that case, the next one here. So what happens with Rosa Luxemburg and her friend, her colleague Karl Liebknecht, is that, as I mentioned, they are the founders of the Spartacist League. Spartacus, of course, from Spartacus, which was a movie in the 1960s directed by Stanley Kubrick about the Spartacus uprising against Rome. And this, of course, was a slave revolt. And they very much labeled this the Spartacus uprising because they literally thought that that's what they were doing. They were slaves to capitalism and they were going to uproot that. So the event known as the Spartacist or Spartacist uprising happened in Berlin, Germany between the 5th to the 15th of January in 1919 when soldiers and a militia that had been gathered, these were members of the German Communist Party, of the Spartacus League, had taken up arms and they started to spread themselves out of different places in Germany. And they started to take over major communication lines, and the photo on the left are Spartacus soldiers, the militia, at the Brandenburger Gate in January of 1919, where they set up, they dug in, they had, defensive positions, and they essentially were demanding change and they were demanding a revolution. And they were doing this essentially by force. Now, how much force? Um, was it the same force as the Russian Revolution or revolutions after? That's debatable. How much violence was there can be debatable, but essentially you can see they did take up arms and they did force their way and force themselves in their way into taking over communication and taking over the economic uh, supply and supply chain um, of Berlin. And it's also worth noting that in December, on Christmas, the 25th of December of 1918, in Berlin, there was a food shortage, a massive food shortage that lasted a long time. And the Spartacists believed that they could alleviate that by controlling essentially the means of production and the economy. Now, what happens now is a little bit, I think, of cause and effect, which is that for every action, as I like to say, is an equal to opposite reaction. Not obviously not my saying, but it's something I do like to say and remind because what happens when a group of very radical people on the left take up arms and start blocking off and controlling parts of your city? It means that people whose job it is to secure that city, i.e., the police and the military, need to come in to stop that. And this is when we talk about counter revolution. Because the Weimar Republic has sort of just been established and it had a lot of these concerning deficits, okay, like mentioning that they had to get rid of hundreds of thousands of rifles and so forth. There probably was some kind of army in the Weimar Republic now, but what mostly happened was a militia group on that were made up of mostly right-wing young people. So monarchists, nationalists, conservatives, maybe some liberals, but mostly on the right, okay, had this organization called the Freikorps. And that, of course, means the Free Corps. And they were, I guess you could say, somewhere like maybe a National Guard unit, sort of. They weren't really reserves. They definitely weren't regular army, but they were citizen soldiers, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a term that is used quite a bit in the US National Guard. And a lot of these young people were students. Some of them, many of them, had not fought, okay, on the front lines. So a lot of them who had just like turned 16, 17, 18 in 1919 were organized locally as well by the police and probably maybe some, officers in Weimar. But for the most part, these young men got into uniform, took up arms, and they countered and they counterattacked Berlin. And by the 15th of January, 1919, the Freikorps had reoccupied the city of Berlin and completely shut down and stopped and took over all the advancements of the Spartacus League. This then led to the capture and the execution of both Rosa Luxembourg and Karl Liebknecht in January of 1919. They were both executed without trial, and their bodies were tossed into the canals in Berlin. I wanted to show this because even today in 2024, there are two very interesting, or actually three very interesting landmarks in the city of Berlin that are named after or that commemorate Rosa Luxemburg. The first is called Rosa Luxemburg Platz. Platz means square in German. And in this square is next to an underground station, so a subway or metro station on the U2 station. And also near there, just a very short distance from and at Rosa Luxemburg Platz, is the Rosa Luxemburg Theater, which has been putting on very avant-garde, progressive, groundbreaking left-wing plays and musicals for a very, very, very long time. So not only is there a square, there's an underground station and a theater all in this location. The other thing is, you can see on the right, there is the name Rosa Luxemburg. This is considered, of course, a sculpture of her name that is emerging from the ground. I believe this is the approximate site where Rosa was executed. You can see in the back there, that is the canal in Berlin. And her her name is rising out from the canal, and it is a memorial and a dedication to her and her legacy. So there are four very distinctive things that you can see in Berlin, even to this day, that are still around that commemorate and memorialize not only the Spartacus League, the Spartacus Uprising, and Rosa Luxembourg herself, who for many radical, leftist feminists, Marxist feminists, and so on, even to this day, study her as a role model. So the next slide here, we're going to talk about what happened in Bavaria. And this is a very interesting thing as well. So we go from Berlin in the northeast to Bavaria in the southeast. Just 3 days before the armistice, in Bavaria, the King of Bavaria, remember at this time, although Germany was an empire and was they called it the Imperial German Empire, which began in 1861 and would resign in 1918, were made up of a bunch of smaller statelets, kingdoms, duchies, grand duchies, and free cities. And one of those larger kingdoms not only was Prussia, but Bavaria, which was a very, very large kingdom that had joined Germany in 1871 following the Franco-Prussian War. So Bavaria had kings. Now, the kings were locally in charge, like a governor. Of course, the emperor was in charge of the whole state. And at this part, it was, of course, Kaiser Wilhelm II. But Bavaria still had a king, and their last king was this gentleman on the left, King Ludwig III of Bavaria. Well, on the 8th of November of 1918, 3 days before the armistice, he advocated his throne. And in the preceding months, especially with the treaties that established Poland and Austria and so on, many of the monarchs, the dukes, the princes, the grand dukes, and the kings would also have to, abandon their thrones. Okay. So what happened was there was an election around this time in the early November, uh, uh, and the gentleman on the right, named Kurt Eisner, is elected to become the first and I believe the only president of what is referred to as the People's State of Bavaria. Now, when we say People's State, right, pretty left wing. And this is what was happening all over many places in Europe. It also happened after the Second World War, when, yes, there were preliminary elections that elected left wing governments, but these left wing governments would also soon collapse. So that state, the People's State of Bavaria, ended on the 6th of April, 1919, when it was transformed into a very short lived, I guess, 1 month of what was referred to as the Bavarian Soviet Republic. This attempt was to make Bavaria a part of the USSR in the hopes that other states would then join and link the two. So on the 6th of April, there was an election. Kurt Eisner lost. And a gentleman on the left named Ernst Toller, who was a poet, seen here in this picture in prison, okay, because he was an anti-war activist. He was also a playwright. Many of his plays would go on to be featured in the Rosa Luxembourg Theater. and he became the first president of the Bavarian Soviet Republic. However, not very long after, just a few days after, there was another election, and the gentleman on the right named Eugene Levine became the second president. Well, what happened after that was similar to what happened in Berlin. By the 3rd of May, 1919, the Freikorps, again, this militia of mostly young men, students, had taken up arms. They were local, so the Freikorps in Berlin that had taken out the Spartacus League may have been different from the Freikorps in Bavaria around Munich this time, who took out and destroyed and ended the Bavarian Soviet Republic, but that was the counter revolution. And so these young men, again, in the local area, got into their uniforms, they got their rifles together, and through the organization of some officers, some police, they were ending up going into Munich. They captured Eugene Levine, and he was executed a few months after this in the summer of 1919. And after, on the 4th of May 1919, Bavaria was incorporated, fully incorporated into the Weimar Republic. And it had been there, of course, until I guess we could say today, because if I'm trying to think here, Bavaria was obviously a part of the Weimar. It was, of course, part of the Third Reich, the Nazi Empire, and then today, after World War II, it was part of West Germany, and it's still a federal state. Of course, it doesn't have a king anymore. Would have a governor, something like this, or a president. However, Bavaria is still a part of Germany, also a very Catholic area. So now I wanted to go back and I wanted, as I mentioned before, we talked about Rosa Luxemburg and her intentions. So let's talk about Ernst Tola, the very first president. I want to also tell you that Ernst Tola escaped after he was ousted in that second election, just a few days after being elected. He would jump ship from Germany and he would go to New York, where he would live out the rest of his life writing plays in the United States. And he would die in 1939. And I believe if it's not in this part, it's in the second part. Well, I will go into more detail. But here are the aims and the intentions of the Bavarian Soviet Republic as per its first president, Ernst Tola. It says here, we do not want to make a Russian or Berlin revolution with bloodshed, but rather a Bavarian revolution of love. Unfortunately, the Freikorps didn't see that in the same light. And yes, the Russian Revolution and the Berlin revolutions were bloody, but unfortunately, the Bavarian Revolution was also just as bloody, especially how it ended. And so next time we're going to talk about revolution and counter-revolution part 2. I will talk more about Ernst Tola and some connections with other people. I'll give you a spoiler. A lot of these people, let's go back here. Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Liebknecht, no. But Rosa Luxemburg, Kurt Eisner, Ernst Toller, and Eugene Levine all have one thing in common. They were all Jewish. And I'm going to get into that later as we see the rise of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. We're going to look at some historical actors who started the German Workers' Party and how it morphed in when Hitler became a member and why. And then I'm going to take you all the way until the publishing of Mein Kampf. So thanks, everybody. This was my presentation for part 1. I thank everyone who's here. I really hope you enjoy it. If there was anything I need to be corrected on, or you have a question, or you want more details, please, write it in the comments and be civil. As I said, if there's something that I said that wasn't right, but please comment, please like and subscribe. So please like this video if you haven't already. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to grow. I'm at 100 and 13 subs right now. I've had a lot of fun, doing these, and part two I think will be very, very interesting, especially how we just mentioned that there were two, you know, communist revolutions, one in Bavaria and one in Berlin, following the Second World War, and both within a few months of each other in early 1919, and how that was the leveraging point to another counter revolution that would bring about the far right. So, again, I wish everyone a wonderful week. I will be back on Wednesday. And Wednesday, I think I'm going to put up a poll again. So please check the poll. I'll probably put it up today or tomorrow. I have two thoughts that are brewing in my head about what we can talk about on Wednesday. I do want one of them to be on pseudoscience and some of Karl Popper's opinions on pseudoscience, and some of the sort of the red flags and how we can tell something is a pseudoscience and breaking that down, which is something I put on the poll last week. So it's going to return, and then I'll think of something else that we can do. I'll put up that poll either by later today or tomorrow. So please check my community tab. Thank you everyone for being here. Irish Mart, it's good to see you. Power Lies, Clearwater, Chad, everyone who logged on. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the fact that you guys like learning, and I do hope that you got a lot out of my presentation. I just want to acknowledge this comment from Irish Mart. Thank you so much. Yep, looking forward to part two. I hope so. Pete, you just jumped on. I'm just finishing, but please scrub by. And yes, please, if you have anything to reply, if you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, any ideas, 4 PowerPoints. 2 weeks from now, I have a PowerPoint done, and then after that, going to make a PowerPoint on the 1848 revolution, which is a very interesting time. And then I think I'm going to do like maybe something like the specifically like Italian unification or something. So I will sort of do more kind of history stuff again. Like now, I might include maybe some loose philosophy things, but I definitely have a number of historical perspectives and events that I'd like to get into. So 1848 will be a big one that'll probably come in a few weeks. But until then, in case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.